50 years ago today, an assassin shocked the world, and modern TV news coverage was born with the murder of President John F. Kennedy. Plus, a promising candidate for mayor squeezed from the race after successful political attacks from both the left and the right. And Kevin Faulkner and David Alvarez offer voters a real choice come Election Day. I'm Mark Sauer, and the KPBS Roundtable starts now. Welcome. It's Friday, November 22nd. I'm Mark Sauer, and joining me at the KPBS Roundtable today are San Diego media writer Robert Lawrence, Dave Rowland, editor of San Diego City Beat, and KPBS Metro reporter Sandhya Dirks. Those of us who are around 50 years ago today remember exactly where we were, exactly what we were doing when we got the news that President John F. Kennedy had been shot in Dallas. Then came the second news flash: the president was dead. There was, of course, shock, deep national mourning, and something new: around-the-clock media coverage. Bob Lawrence, let's start with you. Where were you on that fateful day? I happened to be in 5th grade at St. Mary's School in Detroit.
Well, I'd gone a little bit further in school. I was at San Francisco State College, and my roommate and I had a house out by the beach. And that morning, I had left to go to school, to go to class, and I was on my way to catch the streetcar when I remembered I'd forgotten something back at the house. I don't remember what it was I forgot, but anyway, I had forgotten something. I walked back to the house, and my roommate was bent over the radio listening to the news, and that's what he was listening to, and that's when I found out. Right. And we didn't have a TV set. But eventually we left the house and went to someplace else where the TV set. I don't remember where we went even.
Now, how do you think those of us who remember it, and we're going to get in a moment to our two panelists here who don't remember, they're too young to remember, but how do you think this 50th anniversary, I know seeing all the coverage this week and the iconic images and all, I kind of can actually feel that same sadness and that same time again. Do you feel that yourself?
Oh, sure. Sure, you can't help but feel it, and especially now when there's so much of it around, and the reminders are everywhere. So you remember everything you thought about him and what you thought about at the time, and it all comes back.
And the shock.
And the shock.
Dave and Sandhya, now obviously weren't alive then, but this is certainly one of the major events of the 20th century. How do you perceive this in terms of remembering the events or remembering the iconic pictures, for example?
Well, to me, it's sort of John F. Kennedy. When you come around after the fact, I was born during the Johnson administration, but have no recollections of even his time. My first political recollections were of, I think, like the '72 election, with Nixon and McGovern. But so it takes on sort of a legendary, sort of mythic quality. Even, it felt like it was further back in history than it actually was. It wasn't that long ago. I was born 9 months after it happened, but it seemed so long ago.
Maybe the memory Bob and I have of seeing people weeping at FDR's funeral, for example, which would have been a
well to me, and
reference.
it's I think you might actually play it a little later in the show, but Cronkite's famous iconic announcement of Kennedy's death is that and the film of the motorcade. Those are the two real iconic images.
Right. I'll tell you what, before we get to Sandhya's impression of that, this would be a good time. Let's take a look at Walter Cronkite and see what he said that moment, famous moment in TV history.
From Dallas, Texas, the flash, apparently official: President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, some 38 minutes ago. Vice President Lyndon Johnson has left the hospital in Dallas, but we do not know to where he has proceeded.
All right, so Sandy, that obviously is not a memory for you. It is something you've seen, an iconic. But what is your impression as?
Well, all of this comes attached with this sort of the aura of history, a greater mythos than one can really kind of put words to. It's something you see over and over and over again. I've seen that announcement. I've seen the Zapruder film. I've seen Oliver Stone's JFK. It all becomes tangled up in sort of the media representation that sort of pass on throughout the generations and morph until they become it becomes this untouchable moment, sort of held apart from time.
So impressions, not actually memories. Well, Bob, let's shift now and talk about that assassination, the coverage, which we just saw a little part of it there, because all the networks, 3 networks at the time, went to round-the-clock coverage. Tell us about that time and what that meant in terms of TV news kind of coming of age.
Well, first of all, a footnote is that this wasn't the first time. That the first time something like this happened, and with round-the-clock television coverage over an entire weekend, was in 1949 in the Kathy Fiscus story. Kathy Fiscus was a little 3-year-old girl who fell into a well shaft in Los Angeles, in San Marino, actually. And KTLA Channel 5 in Los Angeles went out and covered that story and stayed with it 24 hours until, and there was like 10,000 people out there gathered around watching this event. Wow. And Channel 5 stayed with that story throughout until it was determined that Kathy Fiscus had died. But that was kind of like the seminal event that showed what TV could do.
But back then, relatively nobody watching.
Well, exactly. There weren't that many people who even had TV sets.
Right, exactly.
But KTLA established itself as the place to go for local news in Los Angeles at that time for live coverage.
And now with Kennedy, of course, they suspended commercials. They just went for 4 days.
Exactly. And I've heard different phrases. The day that TV came of age, the day that changed TV forever. Transformed television news, all those
invented
things.
Modern TV,
all those things are true. And Dan Rather said it was when TV became the national hearth, where people gathered around to see what was going on. Right. And I think of it as the time that TV proved itself. It proved that it could do this, and that from now on, TV was the big player in news coverage, particularly for live events.
Well, I'll tell you what, and here's something you and I both remember, and I sat watching this with my sisters and my mother and father through that whole weekend, and one of the most amazing things to this day, 50 years later, was this clip we're about to show, which was a man murdered on live TV. Really remarkable. Let's go take a look at this.
There is a prisoner. There is Lee Oswald. He's been shot. He's been shot. Lee Oswald has been shot.
That is, I looked at my sisters and I said, you couldn't believe your eyes. Did we just see a man get shot in front of us here?
We did. And it was it's hard to describe because it was just we were already shocked that the president had been shot. Exactly. And this was basically the first perp walk. The police in Dallas were marching Lee Harvey Oswald out, primarily for the benefit of the television cameras and all the news people who wanted to.
We got the guy, here he is.
Yeah, and he's being taken from one facility to another. I don't remember the details.
He was going to get into an armored car, of course he never made it.
Yeah, but obviously the Dallas police did not pay enough attention to security. And Jack Ruby got in there and jumped in front of the camera, which is what I remember seeing that vividly. That suddenly this figure jumped in front of the camera, and you heard gunshots, and you saw Lee Harvey Oswald squinch up like this, and it was just another shock that magnified the shock we were already in.
Well, even today, you don't see. It's not like. Live murders on television are all that, common.
As far as I know, that's the one and only that I remember.
Yeah, you would expect with, even coverage of war is so carefully, regulated that, you're not going to, it's not like you're going to see people dying in combat or whatever. But I can just imagine. I mean, people today, I don't think it would be as shocking because you might expect it with the ubiquity of cameras everywhere.
Shocking.
Sure, but I guess I'm just comparing it to the time then. I mean, I can't imagine how shocking it was.
Well, speaking of shocking, I want to shift gears here into kind of the citizen journalist aspect of this whole Kennedy story. Let's take a look at this clip. And of course, this is the famous Zapruder film, the home movie. Okay, and for the radio folks, I'm sure as it's one of the iconic images in American history here, and you can hear the gunshots there. Horrible as Jackie Kennedy crawls across and the Secret Service agent comes to help. Let's talk about that. We were mentioning just before we went on the air. Today, what would happen if you had the president in an open limousine going on a sunny day through a plaza in a big city?
Or wherever the president is. If the public's around, everybody in the audience or everybody around has their iPhone up photographing the event. And the surprising thing to me still is that Mr. Zapruder was the only person there with a movie camera, a home movie camera.
To come forward with that
because
film,
home movies were not that rare. It was perhaps unusual, but not really rare. And with a crowd gathered to see the president, you'd expect more people to have it. But anyway, his name was Abraham Zapruder. He was a man who owned a business manufacturing women's clothing, and his office was right across the street from where the parade was going by. And he was going to go and watch the parade, watch the president go by. His secretary urged him to go home, get your movie camera. He wasn't planning on doing that. And so he went home, got his movie camera, shot the film, and he knew what he had. And he got in touch with a local television reporter, and they eventually made 4 copies of the film. 2 copies went to the Secret Service. One he sold to Life magazine, and one he kept. And then he sold it to Life magazine for $150,000. And then what he did was he gave $25,000 to the widow of Mr. Tippit, the police officer who was shot. He gave that to his widow. And then after he made the deal with Life magazine, he had second thoughts about it, and he made them agree that the single frame that showed the bloodiest frame that showed the president's head being blown apart, that would not be shown. And the film itself was not shown publicly for many years after that.
Yeah, I think it was like a dozen years.
Something like that. Yeah, what Life magazine ran was a series of stills from the shooting.
Yeah, you talk about the difference between then and now. I mean, those any kind of whether it's with an iPhone or a camera or whatever, it'd be on the news, cable news in seconds.
It'd be on the internet even quicker. I mean, somebody would post it up to YouTube, or these things have a viral life of their own now.
Now, quickly, as we wrap this segment up, I did want to point out, and Bob was on as we were talking about the Boston Marathon bombing here, and within maybe 24 hours, all the cameras there, security, people's cameras, etc., iPhones. We had virtually a movie of that crime and that terrible tragedy.
From 360 degrees.
Before we leave this, I think it's one of the ironic things right now is that so much of this is being observed on the internet. After, and at that time it was just television proving itself. But the other thing I want to inform people is that CBS right now on CBSNews.com is streaming the entire coverage of the weekend.
Oh, really?
From beginning to end,
in black and white.
Of course. And I was watching it this morning.
Oh, fascinating.
And for the first 20 minutes or so, all you saw was a card on the screen saying CBS News Bulletin. Right. And it was sometime after that before they went live, before they had the picture.
Boy, you talk about memories coming back. Oh, great stuff. All right, we're going to shift now. We're going to turn to the big San Diego story this week, the race to replace Bob Filner. And what a finish it was. Councilman David Alvarez, the boy from the barrio, came thundering up on the outside in the campaign's final days to overtake his better-known fellow Democrat Nathan Fletcher. It was long clear that Republican Kevin Faulconer had a clear path into the February runoff, but Alvarez went from dark horse to viable challenger in a matter of weeks. Sandia, let's start with who David Alvarez is. You did a profile of him for KPBS, and I think our headline was "The Boy from the Barrio."
I spent a lot of time with him. We went to some churches up in Skyline. He's a native son of San Diego, born in Barrio Logan. He's 33 years old. He's been on the city council for 3 years. He paints himself as a community activist from a young age, transformed by the realization that the neighborhood in which he lived in was basically suffering from environmental injustice, and that spurred him on to become an activist. He went to SDSU. He wanted to be a mathematician, but at some point, I think he said calculus, he realized that dream was done.
But he can count votes now.
But he can count votes, and apparently he could count districts and votes, and was able to do so in a way that reflected the fact that he actually had the edge in the Democratic side of this race.
Now, Dave, your paper happened to endorse him. I don't know if you were pressing it or what, because it looked like Fletcher had the name recognition and all, but it was kind of a hold your nose and vote. You even use smelly in your theme and your headline. Tell us why you think it was such a smelly campaign so far.
That may have been a little overreaction on our part, but I just really get disgusted at election time. It just the amount of mailers and robocalls that we would get, particularly,
a lot of us
I find it really distasteful when a group like the Lincoln Club of San Diego County, a very conservative, business-oriented group, is calling Democrats or liberals and basically warning them about how conservative Nathan Fletcher is. I just find that just really distasteful.
The phony Karl Rove.
Yeah, the phony Karl Rove voice. Mailers with Nathan Fletcher, making off with a big, giant like Santa Claus sack with a dollar sign on it, like he's stealing people's money, which is nuts, and I'm just disgusted by it.
But it ain't beanbag, is it? I mean,
this campaign got incredibly nasty, particularly towards the end. There was a lot of money put into negative campaigning, and a lot of it was aimed directly at Nathan Fletcher. It really was sort of very distasteful, I think, in terms of watching it just go really, really negative. There was so much scrutiny on these candidates, particularly on Fletcher, but on all of them. And I think that's in some ways sort of a legacy of what happened in the summer of scandal with Filner, that all of a sudden, we wanted to know everything. We wanted to know what they had for breakfast. We wanted to know what their favorite color is. We wanted to know what their, grade point average was.
The media wasn't going to be accused again of not, protecting someone and not looking into it.
I didn't want to know any of that. I wanted to know what their policy positions were going to be.
It did get a little bit sort of over the top in terms of this sort of pendulum swing to over wanting to know, oversharing basically what the candidates were going through, and this over 30 debates and forums that they had. And I really do think there is some sort of reaction to what happened during Filner and what happened to the media, that there was a discovery made after someone was elected that maybe caused a slight overreaction, overcorrection.
Sure. Now, it looked certainly when Filner was stepping aside and we were going to have this special election that Nathan Fletcher seemed to be a shoo-in. He had the name recognition. He was, not that far behind last year in the 2012 race and all, and he fell behind. Now, our friend Scott Lewis over at Voice of San Diego had an interesting take on a labor leader being a kingmaker here and all. Do you buy that? Mickey Kasparian, who sided up with anybody but Fletcher and back Mr. Alvarez?
Sure. I think what Scott wrote was essentially the truth. There was a rift among labor folks. Mickey Kasparian is the guy you're talking about. He's the head of the Grocery Workers Union,
big union,
the largest one, and I believe he's the president of the Labor Council of San Diego and Imperial Counties. Lorena Gonzalez, the former CEO of the Labor Council, famously, got out very early and endorsed Nathan Fletcher, which irritated a lot of folks in the labor community.
And so
the story goes that Mickey went out and recruited David Alvarez to run. And Nathan Fletcher really, as you say, I mean, to me, he really is kind of the major narrative of this, of the last really kind of two elections together. I hate to say a candidate for political office can be a victim of any kind, but he's sort of a victim of circumstances in a way.
And he got squeezed here, as we're saying.
Yeah,
Let's
he
hear
got
from
squeezed in the first election too,
Right.
between Carl DeMaio on the right and Bob Filner on the left,
true.
and Bonnie Dumanis was in there, which kind of compelled him to switch parties, and
Maybe we'll see him out there as a sandwich board. He keeps getting caught between the two pieces of bread. Let's hear what he had to say when he conceded here this week.
It's been an honor to serve the people of San Diego. It's been an honor to be a candidate and to engage in the public dialogue and the public process. And I wish San Diego the very best. I wish our two candidates for mayor the very best.
All right. Now, we have a two-man race now. We've got the holidays coming up. Are we going to get a little breather here? Is there going to be a sprint from New Year's to February when the final election is, or what are we looking for?
Please?
Tough to raise money when you're buying Christmas gifts. Eh?
I think that there will be a little bit of a break and a regroup. I actually just do. I think that one of the things that both campaigns are aware of is election fatigue. We've basically been going nonstop with elections for it's over a year now, and throw in the summer.
Well, the scandal.
Exactly.
Summer scandal, right.
So, I think that there will be a bit of a break, and there's going to be a bit of a regrouping. I'm sure that there's going to be a bit of recalibrating, because for Faulkner's side and for the Lincoln Club and for those that are sort of supporting Faulkner, they're going to have to think about how to take on Alvarez. That's a very, very different game than taking on Fletcher. So, there will be a bit of a pause, but, at any moment that could change. At any moment something could happen, and do expect it to get heated again. There will be more money put into this race, and if the sort of primary lap, if you will, is any indication of what will happen, it's likely to get nasty, and I think it'll be a very, very interesting race.
Well, you've got Kevin Faulkner able to kind of stand back and watch the fur fly here, and Alvarez and Fletcher duke it out. Let's hear right now what Mr. Alvarez had to say here following the results.
I've been an underdog before, and I think they probably are underestimating me. They wanted to get who they thought would be maybe an easier challenge, but it's going to be an uphill battle for both of us.
Bob, what do you think? What's your take this week?
I'm wondering, I'm not sure if this is a good subject to bring up, but I'm going to bring it up.
Okay.
Alvarez's last name. Is this going to help him or hurt him? And I'm thinking, if I were him, I'd be buying as much time as I could on Spanish language radio and Spanish language television. And that if he could say split the Anglo vote with Faulkner and sweep the Spanish speaking vote, he could get in.
Well, certainly would be historic, the first Hispanic mayor of the city, right?
Yeah, he's really got a lot of work to do in the communities that are north of Interstate 8. Nobody up there knows who he is.
Right. In a short time to do it in.
Yeah, they tend to vote more conservative. He hasn't been around that long. He is a liberal Democrat, so he's got a lot of work to do there. What I'm looking for in this election is that it will be another low turnout election. It's the only thing on the ballot. I think the candidate,
although it was surprising, we got mid 40%, which was more than recent special election.
But in any case, it's going to come down to who can energize their supporters the most and get them to the polls. And the other thing is, as you say, Kevin Faulkner got to sit back and watch the fur fly. He got a free ride in this election. Nathan Fletcher, as we talked about, was really the target here. A little bit on Alvarez, but Fletcher was assumed to be the leading vote getter, and that won't be the case.
Let's round it out here, and let's hear what Kevin Faulkner had to say following the results.
It's not about partisanship. It's about leading on principles and doing what's right for the city of San Diego.
Okay, not about partisanship, and that was a theme of his. So let me make a little point. Let me throw this out to you folks. Is this going to attract some national press because we have kind of a microcosm of what's happening demographically nationally? A rising Hispanic candidate here, an establishment, middle-aged, establishment-backed politician on the Republican side, a very stark contrast. Will the New York Times come in and analyze that and say, look, what's happening in this big American city might be happening nationally?
who knows if, I mean, who knows if that will happen? But we can say that it is a microcosm of something that is a much larger kind of trend. And it's actually very interesting because you do have two candidates who are very, very opposed. They're very, very different. One represents
a clear choice.
Establishment, the past, the sort of Sanders 2.0, and the other one represents potentially something sort of new and different, and yes, Latino. So there is going to be a way in which this is really about sort of the soul and the future of San Diego. If Nathan Fletcher almost was a metaphor for San Diego, going from Republican to Independent to then Democrat, the way the city is trending, these two are already on those extremes of that. And so it will be interesting to see the way in which it represents the greater struggle for what's happening in the city.
And what about issues? What are these guys going to be tackling, the main themes as they go forward?
Well, Kevin Faulconer doesn't want you to know right off the bat that he is a Republican, which I think goes to what Sandy is saying.
Yes.
But he does want you to know that he believes in limited government.
Right.
That's his big thing, is saving, trying to save taxpayer money where he can, outsource city functions to the private sector where it's, where it would be maybe more efficient.
Connect the dots and you'll learn he's a Republican.
Yeah, that's his big thing, is limited government, but I don't want everybody to know I'm a Republican because the city is trending pretty heavily.
Well, and Alvarez is the other way. I'm a Democrat, and I didn't them all come out, and I win. Yeah.
Faulconer once told me before he even decided to run, he said, you can't win just running as a Republican in San Diego. You just can't. The numbers aren't there. The question is, has he topped out his support? And can Alvarez pull out enough of his demographic base, the so-called Filner coalition, to actually then keep him at that top level and surge ahead.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks very much. It was a great discussion today. It wraps up another week of our stories at the KPBS Roundtable. I'd like to thank my guests, media writer Robert Lawrence, Dave Rowland of San Diego City Beat, and Sandhya Dirks of KPBS News. A reminder, all of the stories we discussed today are available on our website, kpbs.org. I'm Mark Sauer, Senior News Editor at KPBS. Thanks for joining us today on the Roundtable.